my answer down to that nugget, right? Lay off the FOMO.
Lay off the FOMO. There you go. You got it, folks. So welcome back to Emphasis Tech Talks, the podcast for business leaders leveraging cutting-edge technology to raise their bottom lines. I'm your host, David Clausen of Emphasis Tech. Our guest today is Garrick Villaume, the president of Physical Systems Incorporated. Garrick will talk to us about API in AI systems, change management, and breaking down ROI. This episode has a lot to unpack, so be sure to like and subscribe so that you get notified of future videos as they're released. So, Garrick, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you being on. I know you've got a lot of experience that our audience is going to be really interested in. Let's start off by thinking about the future. So, where do you see things trending from a technology perspective? Where are things going to take us over the next few years? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, David. It's great to be on. And, that's probably the key question, right? The $64,000 question is, what does the future hold? And in the current environment with IT, there's quite a bit of sentiment, right, about where things are headed in some cases, and a lot of anxiety, I think, about it in part as well. And, there's two really big factors, I think, at work that are going to shape the future, that are practical, physical factors aside from what people are thinking and feeling, which is ultimately going to be the guide, right, to where we go. But those two factors are the data, right, the data sources and the universe of information that's being used specifically in the LLMs, right, but more generally than that in a whole host of analytical applications that are exploding around, I'll say, the AI core. But there's also this question of energy, right, and the utilization of power to actually do the computational analyses that drive these capabilities, right, that provide these intelligences, if you want to call them that, right, these capabilities, the ability to, crunch a bunch, right, that we don't know. But from my perspective and my background, I think there's some really interesting harmonies starting to set up, but they're not in tune yet. Right, I'll just say that way. Yeah. I would agree with that part. So, I would say I don't know that the data aspect of it is really settled yet. So I think there was a lot of, two things. One, there was a lot of data that was gathered and collected and saved that really didn't have a lot of value for the use cases. So I think a lot of organizations are now beginning to look at that and say, yeah, we've not seen some value out of some of that data, so maybe we can begin to curtail some of that cost for storage and so forth by cleaning some of that out. Bad data is another issue that a lot of organizations are dealing with. Because to your point, you would think you're supposed to be getting intelligence out of it, but if you're using bad data behind it, it's kind of hard to get good intelligence. So it's kind of that old garbage in, garbage out scenario. So there's still, work to be done on the data side. We're seeing a lot of that. We've got a number of clients doing a lot of work in that area, just trying to get the data that they need. So now with the AI scenarios, they're beginning to see that, maybe they didn't need that data over there, but they need this other data. And so now they're going and collecting that. So it's the whole deck is shuffling from the data perspective. But so I think you bring up some great points. In what do you think is going to be? So what's going to be the tipping point to getting that real value? You said you're supposed to get intelligence out of it. What's the tipping point? How do they know they've gotten intelligence out of it? When will they know to now go and explore the world and get value out of this new technology, AI, and
some of the other things that are coming online as well.
So when specifically, right, is really fuzzy prediction, but I would say that there is value now, right, at some, I'll say, modest level, right, and mostly that's because while the tools are being used quite a bit, there's quite a bit of open question yet about their reliability, right, how well we can depend on them. And behind all of that are a number of questions about, am I doing this in a way that's been legal and fair, right, to the actual sources, right, that provided this capability? So you said that's that issue kind of there to manage by itself, which has to be addressed, right? It needs to be resolved at some point. But let's just imagine that we don't have to worry about that right now, and we're just talking about what information we have and how well we're using it. There's a long way to go before these tools can be dependable. And it's kind of ironic to me that we see this explosion of service offerings in the AI space in a maturity level that no one would ever have purchased if they were thinking about their IT service provision, right, 30 years ago, right? I mean, nobody would take the risks that apparently are embraced these days with little doubt, right? And I worked in an environment for many years, right? My first professional job was the beginning of a 15-year career, right, in a large corporate technology environment. And we talked a lot about the data that we saved, right, to make decisions, right, to do the things that we needed to do to run the business. And we picked over that data quite a bit. And we engineered our system, right, to maximize the knowledge that we would get out of that. We're not even close to doing any of that, right, in these more general applications, particularly, again, LLMs. I mean, when you think about information content and all of those things, what you never hear discussed in the space between academia and the scholarly world and business and the commercial world are, what about all this redundancy and duplication and the variation, nuance, right, we can call it, in content, right, in information. None of that is ever really, in my view, quantified or understood. And all of that presents, I think, currently an unacceptable risk profile for just wild deployment that's happening right now. So, being sure that you have some sort of certified, traceable source of the knowledge, right, that went into whatever tool you're going to use. And I favor well-contained, well-bounded tools at this point specifically, right, because of that. And then how is that actually applicable and validated and tested, right? I come from a hardware development background mostly, right? DVT, right? Design Verification Test, HALT, right? Highly accelerated life test, right? Highly accelerated stress tests. You can't put product on the market in many cases, solar products, for example, without going through those processes and proving, right, that they do what they are intended to do, and they won't do what we don't want them to do, like shock people, right, or create fire, right, in the case of electrical products. We're not doing that in the case of these intelligence applications, right, these softwares that have these purported functionalities, right, claimed capabilities. What's concerning, I think, and where the risk, right, really is unbounded is that we have no idea how wrong they can be. And we've seen some, eyebrow raising examples, right? Some eye popping examples. And in my mind, by the way, that's just a natural consequence of how these things work. Of course, they can replicate any foolish thing any human can ever say, right? And they can also replicate any smart thing any human can ever say, right? But we only talk about the one side, not the other side, right? In general. So it's, there's a lot of texture to it.
I mean, really, it's kind of what we've been hearing from a lot of people here on the channel, is that, take things slow. Go ahead and, get your toe wet, so to speak. Go ahead and get started, but take it slow. And make sure that you're doing things in a way that you can measure them and you can quantify the correctness or the value that you're getting out of it. And that's kind of what I'm hearing from you too, is make sure that it's a bounded approach. Don't just dive in head first here without testing the water kind of thing. I think that's really important, and it's valuable for our audience to capture that, um, and know how to move forward. So that's really good information. Um, and do you see anything? Do you see anything largely different? I mean, I know people have, speculated a lot about AI and how businesses will work and so forth, but um, do you see anything hugely different about how we're going to be using computers in, 5, 6, 8 years based on this new technology, or will it be just a different flavor of what we're doing today?
It's certainly going to be the latter. I think there may be the potential for some substantial changes in the former. But let me come back to the beginning of your comment here, because it reminds me of a phrase that I was introduced to almost immediately on my entry into that first professional environment, and it was let's hurry up to do it over again. All right, and that was kind of a wry, criticism, right? Sarcastic comment that we would make to each other, right? About the urgency of certain projects, right? And the need, right? To go, right? And so in this world that we live in, we have all accepted that go, right? Is sort of the default thing. We all need to go all the time. We're finding, by the way, as a quick aside, that that's maybe not the greatest way to exist, right? So set that aside for a minute and focus just on what we're talking about here and how we're using computers. I mean, we are hurrying up to do it over again in a big way. In that same business later, as I had risen up into the management chain and was involved in planning the costs and the yields and things like that for products, we got to the point where firmware was a huge factor, right, of how the product worked. In fact, one of my team members once said, code is the biggest KPIV to the drive, right, is the disk drive, right? And there was a lot of truth to that, right? Beyond just the hardware. And we used to see people just turn code again and again and again, right, when things weren't working or to try to cover up issues. And we started, I speculated, what is the value of code that gets scrapped, right? If we spend, a week developing code to fix something and we want to push a firmware fix into the field and it doesn't work and we scrap it, where is that on the books, right? Because the code doesn't carry the same BOM cost, right, that a particular piece of hardware, right, did in that product, right? So this is a problem. So now we're developing these tools that are all code, all software, running on, heavy performance computing systems. And if they don't work, we don't really have a way to account for the scrap cost, right, of not just the fact that product, that piece of software isn't doing what it was supposed to do, but that it's also generating other problems and causing other scrap issues, right, if you will, loss issues, right, exceptions to expectation is what I call them. And so that's a big problem. And I think that what we have accepted here by diving into this change is that the dependability has dropped dramatically, right? And we have to embrace risk and be much more fault tolerant, right, and fault aware, and be ready to make error correction on the fly, so to speak, while we're going through this. And so that's going to affect how people are working at a very intimate level with their applications and systems and within their work environment, right, and how they communicate with their people. On a broader society level, I think there's going to be a big backlash around trusting the information sources, around taking the guidance, right, or following the links, right, to their desired destination, right, in any given case, because there's going to be some skepticism and there's going to be, I think, anxiousness, if not outright resentment, that people's ideas are being sliced and diced. And the phrase I use, it goes way back to the work I did early in my career, reduced to bits, right? People's contents, people's intellectual property and output and feelings are being reduced to bits to be packaged, right, and thrown back to them with these tools. So it's a big concern. And I think that's going to be the dominating shape parameter space, right, around how people engage with computers for a long time, because I don't think we're looking at any significant hardware advancements, say quantum computer, for quite some time yet.
Wow. Okay. There's a lot to unpack there. Well, I'm thinking about it. If you haven't already liked and subscribed, you need to do that. We have a number of guests like Garrick here coming up, and you don't want to miss any of those. So make sure you do that. Garrick, let's go back. You made two really good points there that I want to go back and touch on. So one is about the cost. And I wrote it down as, the error cost. And I think you put that a little bit differently. But, in this new cloud computing world, that cost is even, I think it's even a bigger thing. What I mean by that, so in the on-prem world, if a process takes another hour or two to run and there's not something else waiting to run on that hardware, no one cares. Okay, no one cares. It's already, the capital's been expended. Sure, there's a small energy cost factor, but, that's so small, most people aren't even counting that. But in the cloud world, if something that should take 5 minutes is now taking 10 minutes, well, you just doubled your cloud costs, so your operational costs were doubled, right? So in those errors, so it's not only about the cost of the code that is causing the error that gets replaced, but it's also the cost of the platform that's running that, and maybe even opportunity costs if you're in an AI scenario where you didn't pick up something that you should have because of that error. So there's a number of different cost buckets to be captured in that, and I hadn't thought of all of those bits, and I'm sure there's still more for me to ponder in that regard. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
So yeah, let me just tag onto that a little bit more, because I was never an IT professional directly myself, right? But I have worked with IT systems and IT personnel intimately, right, extensively throughout my career, beginning in the late 80s, essentially. And I've gone through the whole enterprise project exercise repeatedly. And I have friends, right, that are CIOs, and I cannot imagine them embracing a wholesale adoption, right, and migration to these applications, given their caution and deliberation and dotting of I's and crossing of T's around all the requirements and the use cases and the scenarios that I saw them do back 15, 20, 25 years ago, right? These changes today seem to be coming faster and with less scrutiny or again, rigor in the ROI and so not just the return on investment, but the risk of investment, right? That is incumbent with these things. And that's what's surprising me, I think, more than anything. And so I would urge anybody in the decision chair around these things to be thinking quite carefully about what they're really getting from a risk versus opportunity perspective, and the cost thereof, right? The cost model thereof. So, if you had a CRM, right, and your CRM gave you incorrect addresses, right, or mixed up, people's names and companies, you would not use it. So why would you take that because somebody replicated a CRM and called it, with an AI, daemon, right, or engine, right, running on top of it, right, or managing it for you. I could have a personal assistant that has all of my CRM. Well, just for example, I'm not trying to jump the shark on anybody's idea out there. I'm not pursuing that idea myself, right, as an application. Somebody should. But would you take it? Would you take it in that case?
There you go. That's it from Garrick right there.
So. Well, that's all I'm saying is that I think that people are intoxicated, and there's a lot of reasons they're intoxicated. But one of the big reasons people keep pounding the booze, if you will, is because we're weary and we're exhausted. And the underlying story of all of this is that all of this tech isn't really helping us in the way we want it to, right? In the way we need it to, mostly. So.
Yeah. So I think there's been a lot of promises that have not been kept. And that's kind of one of the other things I wanted to talk about that you touched on briefly, but I'll put this twist on it, which is so anytime we see new technologies come out, there's a lot of marketing that starts coming in behind them once they start gaining a little bit of traction. A lot of marketing put in behind that. And then so it's like today, I mean, everything's AI. Well, some of those things that I'm seeing that they're saying is AI now, wasn't that long ago. It was just, we have an algorithm that can, find out, go determine something. It was an algorithm. Now it's AI. And some of that has to do with marketing. And then you take on the fact of the economy being where it's at. Well, there's a lot of money chasing after an opportunity for investment. So now they're making investments in areas that are probably not as solid as they normally would have looked to put their investments into. So I think there's more risk being taken today. And you take that and add the whole sales component to it. And so all of a sudden, it's like they have a magic wand that they think they can wave and, get something valuable from it, or at least get someone to spend money to think they're going to get something valuable from it in either case. But to bring it back home to our audience, and when it comes to working with the newer technologies that are coming out, it's really about ROI. So you can't ever lose that focus. If you ever lose the focus about how is this going to help my customer, or how is this going to help us bring more value to our customer, that kind of thing, or how is this going to help us in our, improving our margins? If it doesn't do that, you probably need to back up and rethink what you're doing and why you're doing it. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Garrick.
Well, I completely agree with that. I mean, I'm a Six Sigma trained, multiple disciplines and practice master, and was an executive manager, right, of hundreds of millions of dollars, actually, of Six Sigma projects. And the idea that we would accept the kind of uncertainties with regard to the product's efficacy, right? What is it really supposed to do, and is it really going to deliver what I'm using it for? To me is somewhat mind-boggling, right? Because today, right, in today's situation, money costs more, right, than it did in the last big boom, right, for the tech world, right? Mm-hmm. So in the past, you could put money into ventures and you weren't paying through the nose, waiting for those ventures, right? Waiting for those bets, which I dislike that term and that mindset. But anyways, waiting for those, right, to mature, right, and pay off. Today, you're going to pay a lot, right, waiting for those, just for the time, right, that's kicking off, a lot more. And I'm somewhat surprised by what you point out, is that there's still a lot of money going in, and maybe even more risk, right, being accepted, right, in this because of that. And I think that speaks a little bit of desperation, frankly. And I think that desperation is rooted into, it's a lot harder, right, than it was. And people have gotten accustomed to, a certain level of effort, right, generating a certain level of back return, right, whether it's a job, whether it's, revenue, right, from your business or whatever it is. And that is not happening as fluidly, right, as dramatically, with as high a differentiator, right, as there was in the past, right? So what that's causing right now is maybe people to push double down. I think there's going to be a burn factor that's going to come in here pretty quick, because again, going back and looking at where the tools are, right, and we've got planes, right, that people are very anxious about, because the process of control in the supply chain, in the assembly process, in the oversight processes have broken down, right? And we know why they broke down. Right? We know how to deliver 5 nines of quality, right, if we want to, and 5 nines of reliability all the time, every time, if we want to, in almost every business. We choose not to, and in many cases, we don't need it to be that high in certain businesses, right, in certain products and applications. We need it to be like that in planes, right? We want that to be in our data storage devices, right, because we don't want to lose our taxes, even if they're 15 years old, right? All these things, right? We want it in our cars. We don't want our driving system, right, to not have 5 nines if we're going to have automatic driving, right? These kinds of things. And yet we accept it in these tools that are doing things like creating legal briefs, right, and teaching students, right, and simulating, right, engineering protocols and algorithms. And I think that is fraught with peril, and that there will be, I'm going to say it now, there will be catastrophe rooted in this wanton embrace of these unreliable applications and tools. It's going to happen. When, how severe, who gets hurt, I can't predict that right now. Right? But I can say that it's almost certainly going to happen, and it will be one of probably a few lessons, right, that we're going to learn the hard way.
We don't have to learn that the hard way. So, Garrick, so what's the answer? So I think we stated very clearly, and it's certainly at a high level, though, what the issue is. So what's the action call or call to action here? How do we fix this?
So I think there's 2 things, and I'll put those in supply and demand, right? Generally, and I'll start with the demand side. And the first side is on the demand side. I think everybody needs to sober up and realize that tech is not the panacea that they want it to be, no matter how bad they want it to be, and that there are no magic answers, right, to some of these difficult problems. We're not going to unleash LLMs and suddenly have a cure for cancer, right, a year down the road. It's not going to happen that way. And to expect it at a grand level, like curing cancer, to a micro scale level, like, okay, I'm going to run my business and I'm going to increase my margins, right, by 50% next year because I'm using this AI tool, whatever, anything in between there, right? I think people need to calibrate a little bit more finely, I'll say. On the supply side, there's a whole bunch of problems, right? There's ethical problems with regard to the sourcing of the data. There's a lack of engineering, I think, discipline with regard to, quote unquote, DVT and system, systems and processes and thinking like that. And you may hear from the folks building these systems that, oh, no, we're doing that. But it's like, I have to base my opinion on results, right? And the results are, I wouldn't buy your product if it was a piece of hardware. Why should I buy it if it's a piece of software, right? So that's where I am. And then behind all of that, regulation and policy, I mean, NIST needs to move a lot faster. We need to be much, much more fleet in the development of technology governance than we have ever been, right? As a nation, as a world, it is no longer acceptable because technology is moving so fast and it's so far out over the skis. And I'm sorry, I'm mixing metaphors like a madman here, but technology is so far out over our skis that it's being claimed even by the people delivering it that it could be an existential threat to us. So what are we doing, right? If we're not taking some time, right, to step back and deliberate here a little bit more and to have what I would say are glacial systems processes for putting in the right kind of governance, right, and effective governance, which appears to be because we want something complete and perfect rather than accepting that we will introduce something that's incremental and developing, right, as we go, so that we can at least have something to hold on to as we move. That's my overriding diagnosis of that problem, right? And then behind that is the fact that there aren't many technical people in government. And so all of that needs to change, right? So if anything comes out of this, what I would hope most of all is that a whole bunch of technology-like people, whether it's software, whether it's hardware, think about getting involved in governance, because governance is how we settle all these questions for ourselves. All right. That's what by for and of people is supposed to mean.
Well, we do need good people to do the governance part for sure. That's often where, we run into problems is when we all recognize that there's a need, but then the folks that are getting involved and being a part of that governance, if they don't know what they're talking about, they can do more harm than good. So yeah, that's a good call out that we need tech people getting involved. Completely agree with that. So tell me a little bit about some experiences you may have had in the past, Garrick, to kind of change the subject here a little bit. So often we like to talk about challenges. What challenges have you had working with technology or working with technology people in the past, and how did you maybe overcome that?
That's a very, very long list. So I'll say this maybe in two examples, right? One is very nitty-gritty example, right? So when I was a grad student, I was not the first person to apply a neural network to try to decide what the contained events that we were looking for in our particle detector were. But I was the first to actually build one and introduce it into the production code for the experiment. And I had to do that with a combination of DEC Fortran and C++, which is the native code that was used for a neural network that I was integrating and refining and training for this purpose. And I had to overlay memory in the system space so that the C application could talk to the Fortran application. And that was a tricky little bit of programming that I'm quite proud I did of. And then later in a job, I actually did a similar thing with DOS's virtual memory manager so that I could hold a larger number of parts. I wanted to hold a larger number of parts in memory to do the yield analysis after a wafer was tested, rather than try to, write it to files and then read it back in and all of that stuff. So I played with that. But the bigger challenges that I had with computing and systems came at large organizational and corporate level, right? Specifically in this large disk drive company that I was a part of and advanced, the early part of my career in. I had responsibility for a worldwide failure analysis application and a worldwide requirements application, which is talking about what we touched on a little earlier, voice of customer and flowing down what the market demands down to what the design has to be. Right. And I think there's a gap there, and I didn't necessarily touch on that directly back a few minutes ago, but I will here because it's right in this example of the effort there was around consolidating processes and resources, both the IT systems and hardware infrastructure that was used, but also the fragmentation that had arisen across organizations and how information was being acquired, processed, and turned into understanding, right? And that involves sharing and interacting with each other on that. So analytical work, right, to say, whoa, why did this part fail? Why was that yield bad? What are we going to do about this shortfall, right, in performance or whatever? And what was the biggest lesson for me through all of that was people having trepidation, right, about moving from the comfortable, right, from the known to the unknown, right, and getting them involved in trying to define what that new world needs to be and being proactive about it, right, was the key to that. And then I had a subsequent, many years later, somewhat like circumstance in yet another disk drive company around the same issue, data governance, analytical fidelity and consistency. And it was the same basic set of issues. So those lessons and others, right, that I've experienced have led me to look at tech as less of this mysterious thing that we should be pursuing of its own right, but very much as a tool that is something we should be, considering only in extent to what it's doing for us as people, right? How it's making us, more better people, right? Who live better lives.
Yeah. So that change factor you bring up, I mean, you can't overstate the complexity of dealing with people and with change. And I mean, now it's its own world, the whole change management world. But that's often the biggest trick of most of these projects that we're on, especially if you're replacing something that they've already had, and then you're going to replace it with something hopefully that's better and improved, but it's different. And anytime you start adding that different factor, that change factor, people get really nervous about that. Well, and that's what we're seeing with the AI too, right? I mean, that's the thing there too, is that some things are going to change, and people are thinking, well, that's going to change my world, and it may in some degree, but somehow you have to find that middle ground and know that not all change is bad. Some change is good. Embrace it, learn how to deal with it, and learn how to work with it is probably the better avenue rather than just being nervous about it.
Well, that's actually the primary focus of my personal consulting business, right? My professional services business, which is change management. And I like to quote Spock, right, who was really, I think, Roddenberry. He was channeling Roddenberry, but the fundamental statement is rock bottom truth that change is the essential process of existence. And I will tell you that the corollary is that difference is the driver, be it quantum mechanical, be it human, right, be it astronomical, right? Difference drives change. Now, for intelligent people, right, people that have the ability to project what might happen in the future, right? Recognize the possibilities of different outcomes and choose among them and even orchestrate, right, those outcomes. The best way to deal with change is to make change, right? The world is what we make of it, said Ellie in Contact, right, by Carl Sagan, right? The world is what we make of it. Sarah Connor, no fate but what you make, right? We want to make the world, right? Of course, we cannot insulate ourselves and prevent changes from occurring outside, right? External changes, be it what's happening in the environmental situation, whether it's sociopolitical, what have you, right? But there's another phrase that is applicable here. That is, chance favors the prepared mind, right? We can prepare ourselves to be ready to adapt, right, when sudden change appears. And in fact, my thesis, my proposition, is that by working to make change through innovation, right? Innovation is the great driver, right, of prosperity by creating new capabilities. Just doing that and doing that well in a structured way helps you on the flip side of being prepared for the unplanned changes, the unforecasted changes, those things that you can't see. That's not going to protect you in every and all circumstances, but it greatly reduces the risks that you can at least have some ability to foresee.
Yeah. So change is not only, a lot of people think of change as being risky, but it's also an opportunity. And what I'm hearing is that if you're prepared correctly, you can make use of that opportunity and use it to your advantage. So that's really good. So for our audience, these business leaders that are embracing technology, obviously some new things are going to be coming into their world, or as they move from one system to the other to try to improve things. Is there maybe a tip or two that you can give our audience about how to bring their folks along on that change journey and make that easier and more effective?
Yes, I do actually. Thank you. And it's consistent again with this framework that I've been developing for how to manage change. And I've got a three-legged stool for that, along with a cyclical process. The three-legged stool is people, purpose, process, right? And then what's the process? But everything has to begin with people, and that means, who are we trying to help, right? With a given innovation, right? With a given product, right? With a given service, the customer, and so on. And then who is involved in that provision? Right, all employees, top to bottom, right, full organization, right. What is everybody's role, stake, right? What do we expect of them? What do we want of them in this effort to try to deliver this thing? And we have to understand that this thing, whatever it is well matched to a need. Now that need has to be, or should be, ideally something worthy. Right, not something trivial, not something evil. Right? Nothing in between evil and completely silly. Right, we want to talk about the stuff that's the stuff of everyday endeavor, right, of everyday aspiration, and how we get there. So what are the people that are involved, and what is this thing that we're trying to accomplish? This purpose, right? Are we trying to just make a bunch of money, or are we trying to help people live better lives, make better products themselves, right? Feel better about themselves, what have you. And getting all of that sort of well organized and thinking about it is critical. And then what is your process, right? How are you going to proceed on this thing? I know a lot of folks that are, so-called self-styled chaos lords, right? They shun or spurn process. Well, my answer to that is there's always a process, right? And I'll quote, one of the senior executives that I rose up under: manage the process or it'll manage you, right? Just because you don't accept that there's a process and you don't think you have to manage it doesn't mean you're not going to get managed by it at some point, right? So you always need to manage the process. So those are the things I say. And in a very practical sense, then, we are not in the hurry we think we are to have to make these decisions, to have to accept these tools. The FOMO dynamic has to come down quite a bit, right? It's way off the charts and it needs to come down. That's I guess I would simplify my answer down to that nugget, right? Lay off the FOMO.
Lay off the FOMO. There you go. You got it, folks. Well, Garrick, thank you so much for joining us today and providing this great information. It's really been good. And be sure to check Garrick out and follow him. Garrick, how can people stay in touch with you and learn more about the kind of work that you're doing?
Yeah, you can email me at Great Management Value, GMV at physicist.com. That's PHYSISYST. And you can check out my website, physicist.com. It's not the prettiest website, but it does give you the message of what I just described here. And I'm on LinkedIn. Of course. So.
There you go. That's a good way. And same with me. If you need anything from us, if you have any questions, want to talk about some of the things we've talked about today, especially the data issues or application development and so forth, make sure and reach out to me there on LinkedIn. It'd be great. And take care, everyone. Until next time, be careful. We'll see you then.